Hi, everyone, and welcome to OpsCentral Live. After an enjoyable series of roundtable discussions last year, we're going to mix things up a bit this year, from one-on-one interviews to small groups and, of course, more roundtable discussion. While we're here, I'm excited to announce that OpsCentral has been selected for the NIST Pulse Accelerator program. Part of the program and core to our reason for being is making sure we're focusing on solving the priority challenges for the industry. If anyone can spare some time for a chat with us, it would be very much appreciated if you would reach out to me. I can pop my details in, or you can just reach out via LinkedIn. Today we have the very highly regarded Dr. Richard Gasaway for our first one-on-one interview. He is regarded as the expert in situational awareness and has taught over 80,000 people across the globe. Dr. Gasaway, I would love it if you could introduce yourself while answering the first question of the day. What was it that led you to dedicating your time to researching and teaching situational awareness?
Well, Debbie, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to OpsCentral for putting a spotlight on such an important topic for first responders. The journey for me started over 30 years ago when I became a firefighter, and along the way got introduced to and started becoming a student of near miss and casualty reports, trying to understand how it is that responders get hurt and killed when they're doing high risk, high consequence work. Along the way in that journey, something started happening to me that was, I would say, not desirable. I started to become judgmental of the people who were involved in these tragic outcome incidents, and found myself thinking things like, man, that was dumb. That person must be inadequately trained. That person must be an idiot, and throwing all this judgment around, maybe like what you would see on the chat feeds and social media when somebody posts a video. Although at that time, social media didn't exist, so I just had to think of those kind of comments in my head and in my heart, but no one to share them with. But all the while, I wasn't learning, and I had this kind of epiphany moment somewhere along the way that the judging mind cannot be a learning mind. And when I switched off my judgment and started to turn on learning, I started to ask different questions, which led me to very different answers, which then led to enlightenment for me. So if I would see or read a report where, say, a firefighter died in the line of duty, instead of saying something like, what in the world were they thinking when they did that? I would ask questions like, why did what they were doing at that time when things went wrong make sense to them? Because it probably made sense to them. Something made that situation seem like the right thing to do. What was it that led them to think that way? And that is what got me introduced to the whole concept of situational awareness. And then once I turned on the learning mind, it kind of gripped me, and I enrolled in a PhD program and did my research on situational awareness and high risk decision making, understanding how we form awareness and how awareness is impacted when we're working in high stress, high consequence, time compressed environments with changing conditions. And the things that I learned in that journey of neuroscience led to writing 6 books and developing some programs that I've had the pleasure to share with responders on a wide span around the globe, helping them to improve their understanding about this important topic. And the most tragic part of it is how little responders actually know about it. And that was me. I'm not judging. That was me before I did this immersion into this topic. I didn't know what I didn't know about what situational awareness is and how it's developed and how it can go off the rails and how to improve it or recover from when bad things do happen. And in fact, as I was learning it, I was thinking I missed the class where this was taught. And what I realized, I didn't miss the class because there wasn't a class. No one was teaching it. And then I realized that was my calling, that a topic that I kind of stumbled on too would become my calling, and it would become my purpose in life to share that message with first responders. And it's been so rewarding to be among my peers and get feedback like, where's this lesson been my whole life? And I just kind of chuckle and say, I know your pain. That was me. This lesson was never shared with me. And the tragic connection is when we look at responder significant near misses and fatalities, in the modern day see a lot of connection to issues related to situational awareness. And I say modern day because early on we didn't know we didn't even our investigators didn't know anything about situational awareness, so we didn't even know to make a reference to it. But we've seen more references to it now. We're getting smarter about its importance and its implications, and that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement. But it also makes me disappointed that something that's that important, that is so significant as a contributing factor, is something that most responders spend very little, if no time, learning anything about. I think intuitively they know situational awareness is important. If somebody said that, I don't think anybody'd argue and say, well, no, it's not. I think they would say, well, no, duh, it's important. But beyond that, beyond it being used as a catchphrase, they don't really know what it means or how to develop it or how it can go wrong or how to improve it. They just know it's important, and that's kind of where the lesson ends. And I guess that's my mission, to try to change that understanding for folks.
Thanks. That's a great segue. I think it has become a catchphrase. It's a great way to frame it. How would you define situational awareness?
As I went and looked to the literature when I was doing my research, I found 7 or 8 different definitions. Yeah, I think everybody that does their own research, kind of part of their charge is to come up with their own way of describing it. So I have my own way of describing it, which is kind of a collaboration of the different work that other people have done. So kind of builds on the early work of others. But my definition of situational awareness is a person's ability to perceive and to understand what is happening in the environment around them in the context of how time is passing. Because as time passes, conditions change, and as conditions change, hopefully, so would awareness. And then being able to accurately predict future events, and to do that hopefully in time to prevent bad outcomes. Now, that's a big definition. And I ask responders to please keep in mind what situational awareness is when you're working in your high risk, high consequence environments. And oftentimes they're like, do you realize how many things are on my mind? And now you want me to remember all of that in addition to everything else that is pinging around when I'm trying to do high risk work. So what I've done in the programs that I share with responders is I've kind of boiled it down to just the 3 key words of that definition: perception, understanding, and prediction. And if I can get them to just be thinking about those 3 component parts and how to do each of those 3 component parts, I truly believe in all my heart that will improve their situational awareness. It sounds kind of weird to say it this way, but a significant part of situational awareness is having an awareness about your awareness. In other words, being consciously aware of just how aware you are in the moment. And to say, well, situational awareness is important, but to not give it any further thought than that is probably going to lead you down a pathway of having your situational awareness flawed, and you're not even aware of it because it wasn't on your mind. It wasn't part of what you were thinking about, of that 3-step process and how you continually do that. So that's the definition. And there's obviously a lot more behind the definition. It takes me the better part of a 2-hour class just to teach responders about how to do those 3 component parts. So there's a lot to it. And I think that probably one of the risks is that there are responders out there that maybe underestimate how the complexity of developing and maintaining situational awareness. If you don't understand it, you tend to take it for granted, or to minimize it, or to say, well, a class to teach me about this is 10 minutes and I'll know what I need to know. And I could teach a week-long class, and in a week long I could probably cover just about everything you need to know. It took me 5 years and a doctorate to learn enough about it to feel like I'm qualified now to teach something about it. And for somebody to think, well, just give me the high level, Cliff's Notes version of it, I could, but it'd way underrepresent the complexity of the topic.
You've touched on it a bit, but how, and if you could elaborate on how important you think it is for responders to actually understand the meaning of situational awareness.
Well, I think the definition itself, I don't know that it's important that responders necessarily memorize the definition. Those are just words on paper. But I think it's really important that they understand the how you do it. What's the process for how to perceive the world? How do we do that? How does anything we see or hear get into that 3-pound little blob of clay we call our brain? And then how does the brain make sense out of any of it? If you think about it, it's happening constantly. It's even happening when we sleep, but most people don't think anything about it. They go to a magic show and a magician saw somebody in half on stage, and the audience is led to believe that they literally saw somebody sawed in two. They didn't. There are laws against that. You can't saw people in two. And then the magician will somehow magically put the person back together again with no blood or guts or glory on the floor of the stage from where they sawed them into. And they'll open the box, and their assistant will come out of the box, and the audience will clap and cheer at the marvel of that, quote, magic. There is no magic. It's illusion. And part of the challenge of situational awareness is that our brain can create illusions that allow us to believe that things are happening that aren't, or allow us not to believe things that are happening that are. And when this illusion happens at a magic show, we clap and cheer. But when this illusion happens on an emergency scene, it can be deadly. And there isn't going to be anybody cheering when it happens. And helping a responder to understand how that happens, how can the train go off the track, so to speak, is a pretty important part of it. And also a very challenging part of it, because there are plenty of them out there who don't want to believe that what I'm sharing could actually happen to them. They're in denial. They're like, no, it might happen to somebody else, wouldn't happen to me. So I had to really work hard to develop some exercises that demonstrate this. So, like, for example, if I'm talking about how a responder may hallucinate, I'll always have somebody say, I don't hallucinate. No, like, yeah, you do. They're like, no, I don't. Yeah, you do all the time. You're hallucinating right now. Like, no, I'm not. And I'll say, well, come up to the front of the room. They come up to the front of the room, and I do my woo magic, and there they are hallucinating. And you can just see the stunned look on their face, like, I can't believe this just happened to me. And I don't do it to embarrass them. I tell them it's going to happen. I tell them, when I'm done, you will have hallucinated a reality that didn't really happen. And you'll see it, and everybody in the audience will see it. And so these exercises to demonstrate, to create the proof, because first responders are very proud, very well trained, and think that the kind of things that I'm teaching would never happen to them. And where, in fact, many of the things that happen to us under stress, we have no conscious control over. They can't happen. They do happen. They happen all the time. But maybe fortunately for many of us, it doesn't carry a consequence. And for some of us, it does carry a consequence, a grave consequence. So ensuring that responders understand how that happens, how to proactively be aware of these, what I call barriers to awareness, and sharing some tips and ideas about how to improve it. And even some of the challenge there, Debbie, is when I share that some of the tips and best practices, they don't want to hear it. I don't have to do that. I've never done that. And what you're telling me is just an important step to the work that I do already, because I've not had a bad outcome. I've never had a tragedy. I've never even come close to having a tragedy. And this level of denial, I understand, because that was me. That was me before I knew what I know now. And now I look at these line of duty death reports very differently. And I look at these videos that I see online of things that go wrong very differently. In fact, I look at all aspects of my life very differently, not just emergency scenes, but everything, driving, any activity. And it just being in the mall and being situationally aware of potential things that could happen in a public setting environment. Once you get to where you internalize the lessons of situational awareness, it really does have a broad applicability in all aspects of life, not just emergency scenes. But the focus of what I'm teaching is predominantly for emergency scenes and first responders. And we do some things for business and industry too, but the start of it all, the passion work behind it all, was with first responders.
Can you tell us more about how stress affects situational awareness?
Yeah, stress is the game changer. Stress changes brain function. And if I want to pause before I talk about how it changes things, here early on lays one of the biggest risks that we have. Is most of the time when we train, most of the time, not always, nothing's always and never, but many times when we train in non-stress or low stress environments. Classrooms are low stress environments. Most training grounds are low stress environments. And then we go out to emergency scenes and we have the most incredible amount of stress that you could imagine. And so you can just see the disconnect. Train in a low stress environment, but perform in a high stress environment. There's going to be challenges, because we're facing now some of the situations that impact situational awareness that are stress induced. So as I said, stress changes the brain function. We have two sides of our brain, left brain, right brain. Got a little ridgy thing goes up the middle, separates the two sides. Both sides of the brain are used in nearly all aspects of how we think and make decisions. There are things that are predominantly left brain and things that are predominantly right brain. And one of the things that left brain predominantly controls is rational thinking, rational judgment. And right brain predominantly controls our access to intuition, gut feel, things like that. Under stress, rational judgment slows down. And you might be thinking, oh, wait a minute. So when I'm under stress, if rational judgment slows down, does that mean I'm going to act irrationally? If rational judgment is impaired under stress? Well, as you've observed some of the things that you've seen some responders do, it might absolutely appear as though they're acting irrationally. But what happens when right brain function slows is left brain function as left brain function slows, right brain picks up the pace, and we start to become intuitive thinkers, primal thinkers, instinct driven thinkers. and we find ourselves doing things based more on past experiences, habits that we've developed, repetition of experiences. Now, if those all have been great experiences, well orchestrated, and planted very strong experiences into memory in the form of habits, then under stress, when we revert back to habits and start doing things automatically without conscious thought, then we might have great outcomes because we've got a strong foundation of stored knowledge, or what we call scripts or schema, that our brain can draw on to help us to know what to do instantly under stress. That's a great skill to have. If the stored knowledge is not necessarily so best practice driven or robustly developed, then we might have a responder that makes a bad decision, not because they were consciously thinking through what they were doing, but because they were in right brain mode and they were doing things quickly and automatically based on habits and stored knowledge, and it might not turn out well. And then people will line up to criticize them. And one of the criticisms might be, what in the world were you thinking when you did that? And the truth of the matter is, they might not have been thinking at all. They might have been performing whatever they were doing automatically based on stored knowledge in the subconscious that comes out under stress. Under stress, we become hypervigilant, which means all of our senses go on a heightened sense of alertness for danger. So under stress, the eyes can see better than when we're not under stress. The ears can hear better when we're not under stress. Feel, taste, and smell. The acuity of all the senses increase. And the reason is to help us to see and hear and sense danger. So it's primal, which is good until it turns bad. Because as we turn up the acuity, the brain also then is taking in and processing more information, because there's more data inputs from vision and more data inputs from sound and such. And what can happen is that our brain can get to the point of saturation or overload, where it just can't take in any more information. It's just reached the point where it's just like, I can't take any more. And when it reaches that point, it stops processing. It stops taking in new information. It stops processing the meaning of that information. Now, it doesn't mean your eyes stop seeing, although under stress, under severe stress, you can go blind. It doesn't mean your ears stop hearing, although under stress, you can go deaf. For this example, it just means that those inputs are coming in, but the part of the brain that processes meaning of those inputs are so busy processing the meaning of so many inputs that it just says, I can't take any more. I can't process anymore. And it starts to filter out and drop some of that information. And we might think, well, it'll drop the least important information and remember the most important. That's a wish. At a level higher than what we consciously control, the brain can decide what information it wants to hold on to and what it wants to drop. And it can drop some of the most important and remember some of the least important. Under stress, it's hard for us to understand and process the meaning of complex and detailed information. So like if you're in a classroom class that's teaching you a lot of things that are high complexity and requires a lot of mental processing of information, you might in the classroom get to the point where you get very good at that, like calculations and things like that, and then find yourself in a stressful environment not being able to do the very same calculations that you could do flawlessly in the non-stressed environment. So we have to remember that volumes of information under stress is not our friend, it's our enemy, because of how difficult it is for us to process the meaning of complex and detailed information, mostly because of that slowdown in that analytical thinking left brain. Then we obviously, under stress, we can experience mental fatigue because of the volumes of information that our brain is trying to process. Just think of it as like if you're, lifting weights or going for a long run. The more weights you lift, the longer you run, the more you get fatigued. The same can happen when we're under stress. The more our brain is trying to process complex and detailed information and make important decisions, we can get mentally fatigued. And as our muscles get fatigued, we slow down. We're running and we get fatigued, we can slow down. When our brain gets fatigued, it can slow down. And when it slows down, it stops processing, and we start to miss some really important clues and cues. And maybe the final thing I want to say is, under stress, we revert back to our habits and our routines. Those habits and routines we develop over the course of long periods of time of experiences and training become that subconscious programming that I called scripts or schema. And under stress, our brain accesses those stored experiences and can pull them out and guide us to an action so quickly that we don't even really have to consciously think about what we're doing, which, again, can be life-saving. I mean, that's the good intention of it. But if the stored scripts or schema are poorly inputted or poorly designed or shortcutted training, it can lead to some bad outcomes. So stress is the game changer. Stress is what can cause somebody to have flawless performance on simulations and then get out to the real incident scene and find themselves frozen under the complexity of the situation because they're gripped by stress.
I'd like to talk about technology now. So we live in a world of data and access to data that can be provided to responders immediately. You're just talking about kind of what happens when you need to process a lot of information under stress. And does this type of information improve or reduce situational awareness?
The answer is it can do both or either. If you think about our brain this way, when we're born, there is a certain amount of programming that's already there. In other words, the brain is not a tabula rasa, a blank slate. We are born with some innate knowledge and innate abilities, like fight and flight syndrome. Fight and flight response is a genetically ingrained instinctual response to threat. When you think about the earliest of evolutionary process of our brain, which took literally millions of years to develop, at that time when we were going through this evolution, we did not have access to technology. We didn't have immediate access to Google, as an example, that if we wanted to know something, we can put a search term in and bring up 100 different sources, set aside the fact that some might not necessarily be accurate, but 100 different sources of information that we can overload ourselves with, that our brains are not really designed to be able to process volumes and complexity of information. There has absolutely not been, it will take eons of evolution for our brains to develop a way to intuitively process technology. We're not there yet. We're, 30 years, 40 years into the world of, the modern tech era. You think about like how old the internet is, or how old, different browser companies or search companies are, and or the first computers that were ever used in the fire service, automated CAD dispatch. It's all fairly recent in the evolution of our species as a product. So we can be fooled into thinking that our brain is better at managing technology than what it is. We just haven't evolved there yet. It's no one's fault. It's not the tech company's fault. It's not the user's fault. It's just evolutionarily we need some time to get good at it. But unfortunately, the time will not be any individual person's on this call lifetime. Time is maybe by the year 3000 or 4000, we might have wiring changes in the brain that take into consideration the everyday existence of technology, which then unto itself will always be evolving and changing as well. You think about our early evolution, there wasn't much changing over the course of someone's lifetime. You left the cave, you hunted, you tried not to be some other creature's lunch, and you drug something home, found a way to, when we discovered fire, cook it and eat it, and you found a way to procreate and pass our genes on to another evolution or another generation if we were the most strongest of our particular species or genome. And that was really what it was all about for millions of years. And then time went on, and if you just listen to the kind of like the beginning of the TV show Big Bang Theory, where they spend 60 or 80 seconds talking about how we got to the modern day, pyramids and writing and music and theater and art, and then all of a sudden it was motorized vehicles, and then now we've got the technology on the surface of Mars. And you think about over what time frame this most recent and speed of the advancement of technology has been. It's mind-boggling, and it's also mind-prohibiting. We're just not where we are yet intuitively good at processing technology. So the answer is that technology can be good or bad. In a non-stressed environment, technology can be very helpful as you access data and you have time to process the meaning of data and triangulate it and compare it to other data and then do analysis to help you improve your decision making. With the absence of time restrictions and stress, technology can be very helpful in making important decisions. But when you add the element of stress to it, when you add the complexity of changing conditions, when you add the time compression to it, volumes of data in that environment can be very, very crippling, even leading someone to get to the point where their brain would freeze up. The term is analysis paralysis, maybe someone around that. You get to the point where you just get frozen because there's so much data coming at you. You can't even sort out what's important and what's not, and how to make it applicable. And by the time you do, information has changed again. So when I think about technology, I kind of think like the Goldilocks principle, for those who might remember that child's story about Goldilocks and the three bears and the porridge. The porridge was one was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. When I think about technology and access to it and speed of access to it and the accuracy of it, I think there's maybe the potential to have too much, too little, and just the right amount. It's, if you think about it using an analogy, if you think about it like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, if I give somebody 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, it's going to take them hours to put it together and figure out what the puzzle's supposed to be. Or if I give them 7 pieces of the puzzle and 4 of them are corners, so that kind of primes the knowledge. At least you've got where at least 4 of those pieces go, but maybe not exactly initially. But small amounts of information are easier for us to assemble and process and store and recall than volumes of information. And the one thing I worry about most with technology is that our developers be very friendly to how the end user's mind functions in high stress, high consequence environments. The developer, I would like to think, I'm not a developer, so I don't want to speak for them. It would be way out of turn for me to do that. But I would like to think that the developer is not in a high stress, high consequence, time compressed environment that is the same that the end user is going to be in. And I think a lot of times developers are not immersed in that environment, so they're developing technology that makes a lot of sense for them And they think it's going to make a lot of sense to the end user because it makes a lot of sense to them. And then it goes out into the field, and the end users find that the technology isn't very friendly for them for a lot of reasons, not just because of volumes of information, but for a lot of reasons. The technology might not be end user friendly, which then can cause them to become frustrated or just not use the technology or misuse it or become heads down on the technology and stop really paying attention to the incident. When I think about data, I think about the right data presented in the right format, clearly, with minimal complexity, and provided at the right time to be valuable to the decision maker. And I worry that out there in the world there is, and I'm not probably telling anybody anything that they don't know already if they're paying attention. There is a fair number of companies out there promoting their technology solutions, saying that their technology creates situational awareness. It doesn't. It may provide access to data, but it's not creating situational awareness because that's created in the mind of the end user. And you imagine how foolish it is to say, well, if I give you enough data, your situational awareness will be improved. And I make an argument that if you give me enough data, you will absolutely destroy my situational awareness. So I think there has to be some reconciling between the IT component and the neuroscience component, and the two need to be married up in a way that they're working collectively and bring the end user in on the development as well. And then you can end up with a product that is technology friendly, brain friendly, and end user friendly. But I worry if we're maybe not approaching it quite so holistically. And I want to move cautiously because I know what your company does is technology driven, but I think it's fair also to say that I'm not speaking about your product or what it can do or can't do. In fact, I haven't even reviewed your product on purpose to this point because I didn't want to have our conversation influenced by anything that I would see or believe about your product. So as I talk about these concerns, this is not about OpsCentral. This is a general observation about the general application of technology in our domain at the current state of affairs of technology. And I get very frustrated when I see these companies making these big situational awareness claims because I know they can't back them up. They're using it as a buzzword and they're using it as a sales tool. And what they're going to find, what end users are going to find is not only does their product improve situational awareness, but it actually frustrates the end user and impacts awareness. And then will have spent a lot of money on a solution that isn't going to work for them. So that's a long answer to a short question.
That's all good. And I like the challenge around the situational awareness and how technology supports or has a hindrance for that. I'm precious about the fact that that's what we're doing. It's actually a conversation we have a lot. Personally, my experience is I'm aging myself, but over a decade ago in user experience design, exactly based on this. I'd watch a bunch of people sitting in a boardroom or a meeting room, designing stuff with very good intentions, building stuff and launching it, and then getting frustrated that nobody could use it properly. And I used to frequently say if one person has an issue using it and everyone else is not using it, it might be the individual person, but if it's en masse, it's the software that's the problem. It's front of mind for us. We do as much usability testing as we possibly can, but it comes with its challenges. How do you do that kind of testing? To your point about training in a in the same context, we can't. So we live to improve, and we try and figure out how to do it. I love your puzzle analogy. So we're trying to find out the right amount of pieces of the puzzle to make it useful. And from the interviews we've done, we know that people are still grabbing paper manuals in the back of their truck and grabbing their phone to figure out the weather. And I think people are engaging with a lot more data than they maybe recognize. But we'll definitely keep up this discussion, because if we can do it the right way, then I think we're all in a better place for it. So appreciate you saying that.
Sure.
All right. So do you think situational awareness is more important at the front of the emergency or at the end?
I think it's important all the way through, from actually before we even get the call. The term that I would use is pre-awareness. So there's some things that we can be knowledgeable of before we ever get an incident, using pre-planned data, knowing something about the personnel that we're going to be working with, their abilities, their limitations, what training they've had. There's a lot of awareness we can develop before we even get a call for service. And then when we get the call, we could have awareness about addresses, pre-plans, previous calls to that location, flag data for maybe potential violence situation that might be at that address, which all is our pre-arrival awareness. Then when we're responding to the call, the dispatch or communication center shares information with us about what the caller, reported to them. So that contributes to our pre-arrival awareness, because as dispatch gives us information that those dispatchers' words paint a picture of understanding on our mind, which helps us to develop our awareness of what we should be dealing with when we get there, which then sets into motion expectations, which are good because expectations can keep us from being surprised or caught off guard. But expectations can also be bad, because once we arrive on the scene with certain expectations of what we're going to see or be dealing with, we may find ourselves, thanks to the mind's eye, seeing only what we want to see and hearing only what we think we should have heard based on information that dispatch shared with us. So you have the pre-awareness, you have the response period awareness, you have the size up awareness, and then you have the ongoing, developing situational awareness as part of a size up is not a one-time do it and, check mark it, it's done. But as long as conditions are changing all the way through an incident, clear to the very, very end, even when we're to the overhaul, a lot of maydays happen during overhaul. We have to have this element of situational awareness in the 3-step process of perception, understanding, prediction, all the way through to the very end. And then I would be remiss to say, and then even on the way back, if I didn't say on the way back to the station as well, because of how many responders are hurt or involved in accidents while returning too. So there's an element of awareness there. And so I think there's not a time period during our service to our communities where situational awareness is not important. Maybe while you're sleeping, but even the thing you're doing in station, training, cleaning, truck checks, there's still an element of situational awareness. If you're not paying attention and you slam your finger in a cabinet door or bump your head on something and cut it, in a station, there's a situational awareness component to that as well. So it has a broad application in all that we do in the entire timeline in which we're engaged in all that we do, from pre-awareness all the way through to post-incident and beyond. I think that's why it's so valuable, is once we get good at the skill set, it just becomes kind of like ingrained in the way we think and look at things. And then we never look at things the same way again, because we're developing, we've developed a kind of a new skill set toward being more situationally aware.
I think we've covered a lot of the questions we had, but I would like to put a question to you that kind of combines some of the comments that I'm seeing in the question. Is that is the context of responders' lives, whether they're going through personal stress or if they have mental health challenges. Like how does that work with situational awareness? I would imagine it has similarities to stress. So.
Well, we have three kinds of stress. So to kind of elaborate on that, you have the acute stress. That's the stress of an immediate scenario. You have episodic stress, which is a series of acute stressors like call after call after call. And then we have chronic stress, the long-term stress of repeated exposure events of stress over the long run. And all of them hold an element of consequence for responders. So as you think about situational awareness on a particular call, you think about the acute stressors that are impacting a responder, immediately on that call. But then when you think about responders going to call after call after call, you think about some of the things that relate to the accumulation of stress and fatigue and anxiety that might be building over a series of calls on a single shift. And then you think about the longer term chronic stressors that can have long-term implications to a responder's health, both physical and mental. So depending on the which form of stress we're talking, like a one-off event versus a collective series of one-off events versus a collective series of events over the course of a career or years, the stress has different lasting potential for different lasting impacts on us and our ability to perform. I think it's an important question, because when you look at the incidence of post-traumatic event stress in responders and firefighter suicides, that this is a really important topic, and we need to get beyond looking at mental health as an affliction to be embarrassed by, and look at it as a medical condition, as real as a broken arm. And if a firefighter broke their arm at a call, nobody would stigmatize them or judge them other than they might, poke a little fun at them depending on how it happened. But they wouldn't try to hide it, because it's just one of the hazards of the occupation. And so is the same with mental health. These repeated exposures to high stress situations where we see things that we were not programmed to see. We see the worst in society. We see some of the best too, no doubt about that. But I don't think that's what leads to the PTSD, I don't even like to call it PTSD. I like to call it a post-traumatic event brain injury, because I don't even like the contextual accusation of a responder having a disorder, because that even lends itself to some form of judgment or criticism. I like to think of it as an injury, and it is an injury, because what happens is repetition exposures to stressful events like that change the brain function, change the brain chemistry, changes the brain electrically. So it's physical, it's measurable, not always predictable, because two responders that have the same exposure to a traumatic event, one might be affected and one might not. So it really depends on the type of stressor. I'm not trying to elude the question because I think it's a fantastic question and an important conversation to have. But it's a topic that has a greater complexity than maybe what we could cover on an event like this.
I agree that it is a lot of complexity. We had a deeper chat about it last year, but to your point about an injured arm, like the outcome is with the impact as opposed to how it happened. So the same incident could happen to two different people, and one might break their arm worse than the other. So I agree, and a very important topic to keep addressing. Before we finish up today, do you have kind of any final thoughts you would like to leave with everybody? And you're welcome to explain what you do from a bit more from a training perspective.
I think if there were out there in the audience responders who would be inspired to want to learn more about situational awareness other than knowing that it's important, because I think everybody knows. I think they know it's important. If you said, well, I sense from the way Rich is talking about this, there's more to learn than just keep my head on a swivel or pay attention, then you got it. There is more to learn. And if you wanted to learn more, I'd say just visit my website, and there are 400 plus articles that I've written on the topic of situational awareness and high-risk decision-making, and they're all free for you to use, read, download, share across your organization. And then I have a show, which is podcast-based and YouTube-based, where I interview responders who've had near-miss events and allow them to share their stories and their experiences as it relates to situational awareness lessons. And that show is free for responders to subscribe to and watch or listen as well. So it's SA Matters Radio on podcast players and SA Matters TV on YouTube. And I think if somebody wanted, of course I've got books and videos, but no one really has to buy a book or one of my videos or take one of my online classes. I have them, but if they just wanted to immerse themselves in the free teachings on my website, just about everything they'd need to know about the topic is there if they'll only give me the gift of their time to immerse themselves into learning it. The only thing that my books or my online programs do is finds a way to kind of package it together and synthesize it so that it's more efficient for them to learn versus clicking through an article or watching podcast after podcast after podcast. The virtual training and the books are a way to just get the information like straight to the point in a more condensed way. But they don't have to do that. They can just immerse in the website. And a long time ago, somebody suggested that I give away everything that I know for free. And I said, well, why would they do that? And they said, if you do that, you'll never run out of organizations that actually want to bring you in to teach your knowledge in person. Because if they realize that you're willing to give away all that for free, they'll value what you can add to it when you come in person. And it's kind of like watching your favorite musician on YouTube. You watch them in concert on YouTube, and you watch all their videos on YouTube. But as soon as they come to town in concert, there you are. You're going to see them live, because the live experience is so different than the YouTube video. And so that's kind of been my philosophy is give it all away, and then those that are really inspired will maybe invite me to talk to their organization or their conference or something like that.
Yeah, great philosophy. And we all learn differently. I certainly wouldn't have the attention span to be able to get through reading 400 articles, but learn a lot from being, talking to people. So a good balance there.
Exactly.
Right. Well, that's it for today. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Gasaway, for such an interesting discussion. I've learned a heap I might even go and read some of those articles myself.
Fantastic.
As always, this will be immediately available on the OpsCentral YouTube channel, so feel free to share it within your organisations and watch this space for future events. Thanks very much.
Thank you.